8 words. And suddenly a lifetime of work, 14 years of basement tinkering, 23 lab notebooks filled with 300 pages each, one man's dream of a factory with nice shrubbery employing local people, all of it came spilling out. Before I tell you the one decision that cost Robert Kearns everything and made him a millionaire who died believing he'd lost, go ahead and subscribe. This is Patent Mysteries, and we uncover these moments, the ones that change history, the human mistakes that shaped the world we inherited. Born in 1927, Kearns spent his youth in Detroit, Michigan, ground zero for the flourishing American automobile industry. He grew up in River Rouge, in the shadow of a Catholic church on one side and the Ford manufacturing plant on the other, the plant that was the lifeblood of his hometown. As a kid, he toured Ford Motor Company's River Rouge complex, then the largest integrated factory in the world, and marveled at the auto giant's innovations. He told a New Yorker reporter years later, "The automotive, that's all there was. If you were an inventor, and you really wanted to reach people, you invented for the automotive." This wasn't idle dreaming. Kearns was brilliant. After the war, he received a full scholarship to the University of Detroit, where he earned a BSc degree in mechanical engineering and later a Master of Science in Engineering Mechanics from Wayne State University. He didn't stop there. He went on to receive a PhD from Case Western Reserve University and also earned certificates in nuclear reactor control from Argonne National Laboratories. By 1957, he joined Wayne State's faculty. He rose to associate professor by 1963. He was methodical, obsessive in the way only great inventors are. He built a laboratory in his basement, separated from his wife's laundry room by a glass-paneled office. Under fluorescent lights, he cultivated his ideas with voltmeters, capacitors, relays, and oscilloscopes. Day, and often in the middle of the night, he slipped down into the family basement, logging his findings in 23 300-page books. His wife Phyllis remembered, engineering was his life. The idea came to him while driving. In 1963, Kearns was driving his Ford Galaxie through a light rain, and the constant movement of the wiper blades irritated his already troubled vision. The existing wipers, primitive things with just 2 settings, on or off, high or low, either dragged squeaking across dry glass or left the windshield obscured. He modeled his mechanism on the human eye, which blinks every few seconds, rather than continuously. It sounds simple now, doesn't it? But simple is not the same as obvious. Kearns holed himself up in a corner of his basement with a pile of off-the-shelf electronics, transistors, capacitors, and variable resistors, and built his first intermittent wiper prototype. The genius wasn't inventing new parts. The genius was seeing how to combine existing parts in a way no one else had imagined. He housed the device in a red box marked "Do Not Open" and installed it in his Ford Galaxie. He began with experiments on a large pane of glass, then graduated to a Dodge dashboard and windshield, salvaged from a junkyard. His former wife recalled, "Of course, if it rained, we dropped everything and ran outside, got in the car and ran a test." By October 1963, Kearns' maroon Ford Galaxie convertible was ready for the real thing, a demonstration at the Ford plant in Dearborn, Michigan. Picture him driving that convertible to Ford headquarters, the red box with its ominous warning sitting on the passenger seat. He had a plan, clear and beautiful in its simplicity, demonstrate the invention, license the technology, open his own factory, something modest, maybe 30,000 square feet, with nice shrubbery around the plant, and become the automobile industry's go-to supplier for windshield wipers. He'd set up a pretty little factory in Detroit, become a major supplier of windshield wipers, and go down in history as one of the automobile industry's great innovators. Through a mutual connection, Kearns was able to set up a 45-minute meeting with Ford's engineering team. On the big day, Kearns was greeted by 10 engineers in the parking lot, who peppered him with questions about his invention. They seemed interested, genuinely interested. They expressed interest, but told him the wipers had to run for 3 million cycles to meet their standards. So Kearns went home and tested. He bought an aquarium, filled it with a mixture of oil and sawdust, installed a pair of his wipers inside, and let them run for 6 months straight. 6 months of his life watching wipers move through muck, proving his invention could handle anything. Upon passing the test, Kearns filed his first patent for the invention on December 1st, 1964. He returned to Ford. This time they offered him a contract. Finally, the dream was crystallizing. But the contract came with one condition. Ford claimed that, because wipers were a safety item, all of Kern's engineering had to be disclosed before the contract was signed. This is the moment. This is a crack in the foundation that would split everything apart. Can you see it? A condition that sounds so reasonable, so standard, so safe. Safety items require disclosure. Of course they do. What could be more logical? Sensing that he was close to fulfilling his dream, Kern showed Ford exactly how his device worked. He opened the red box. He explained the circuitry, the timing mechanism, how the variable resistors created the pause between wipes. Feeling a kinship with his fellow engineers and thinking a deal with Ford was in the offing, Kearns revealed many of the inner workings of his wiper design to the Ford engineers. For the next 2 years, he met periodically with groups of Ford engineers. They discussed intermittent wiper technology. They asked questions. They took notes. But no offer was made to him to license his technology or to partner with him in any way. The meetings became less frequent. The calls came farther apart. Then, at the end of 1965, Ford stopped calling Robert Kearns altogether. He should have known then. Some part of him must have suspected. But hope is a powerful drug, and Kearns was addicted to his dream. In 1969, the Ford Motor Company introduced the first electronic intermittent windshield wiper. When Ford introduced the feature in 1969, it rolled out to its Mercury line. Not Kearns' wipers, Ford's wipers, using Kearns' design. Kearns, still believing that a deal with Ford was possible and that Ford was acting in good faith, didn't question Ford's intentions until 1976. 7 years. 7 years of believing the company he'd admired since childhood was acting honorably. While Kearns waited, trusting, hopeful, his life moved forward in other directions. Kearns and his family moved to Montgomery Village, Maryland in 1971, where he worked for the National Bureau of Standards, creating a standard for measuring skid resistance on roadways. He built another basement laboratory in Gaithersburg. He was a good engineer, doing good work. The intermittent wiper had become a memory, filed away with other dreams deferred. He had 6 children with his wife Phyllis. They had built a life together. The basement lab was still there, still filled with his notebooks, but the obsession had dimmed. Maybe Ford had come up with a similar solution independently. These things happen, right? Convergent evolution. Great minds thinking alike. Then came July 1976. Kearns' eldest son, Dennis Kearns, acquired an intermittent wiper control box used by Mercedes-Benz. A German automaker, prestigious and respected. Dennis brought it home to his father. Probably curious. Probably just wanting to see how Mercedes had solved the same problem. Reverse engineering the Mercedes box, Kearns realized that the design was a literal copy of his patented invention. Not similar. Not inspired by. A copy. He examined the electronic entrails. It was a copy, he says. In his basement dwelling, it hit him like a sledgehammer. Even the great Mercedes was using his design. Then he started digging, poring over the patent filings from Ford, Volkswagen, Renault, General Motors, Mercedes-Benz, and others. Kearns recognized that they had all simply copied and pasted several key elements of his design and incorporated them into their own patent filings. They hadn't even been subtle about it. His language, his circuitry, his specific arrangement of transistors and capacitors and variable resistors. Kearns was crushed and angry that companies he had admired his whole life were stealing from him without regard for his rights as the patent holder for the invention of the intermittent windshield wiper. Kearns described the company's behavior as, "Bob Kearns doesn't count. He's nothing. He doesn't exist." In 1976, the intermittent wiper feature appeared on a Mercedes Auto, and Kearns soon suffered a mental breakdown. The details are painful. He was found in a bus station in Tennessee, where Phyllis, Dennis, and his daughter Pat picked him up. His mind had broken under the weight of betrayal. The companies he'd trusted, the industry he devoted his life to serving, had looked at him and decided he didn't matter. But here's the thing about Robert Kearns. He was stubborn in a way that transcended reason. From 1977 onward, Kearns referred to his occupation as litigant. Not inventor, not engineer, litigant. Could Kearns have survived if he'd never opened that red box, never revealed his circuitry before securing an ironclad contract? Drop a comment. I genuinely want to know what you think. In 1978, Robert Kearns filed a lawsuit against Ford Motor Company, seeking $141 million in damages. The number would eventually climb to $325 million, then to $395 million, as the years dragged on and the calculations grew more complex. He filed lawsuits against Ford, Chrysler, General Motors, and several European carmakers, including Mercedes-Benz. As the legal cases worked their way through the courts, the stress on Kearns and his family mounted. 3 law firms took his case. 3 law firms dropped him. Through decades of litigation, Kearns was dropped by 3 law firms and continued to serve as his own attorney. Several cases were dismissed after Kearns missed deadlines for the filing of papers. He represented himself. A lone inventor with a Ph.D. in mechanical engineering facing corporations with legal budgets that dwarf the GDP of small nations. The years of court battles took a toll on the family, especially the couple's marriage. Robert and Phyllis Kearns separated in 1981 and had a drawn-out divorce that was completed in 1986. During the divorce proceedings, Kearns was held in contempt and put in jail for 90 days. His children watched their father transform into something else. Not the professor, not the inventor. Something harder, more driven, more isolated. Kearns' obsessions broke down his 27-year marriage and caused distance between him and his children. Ford's defense was elegant in its cynicism. The legal argument the auto industry posed in defense was that an invention is supposed to meet certain standards of originality and novelty. One of these is that it be non-obvious. Ford claimed that the patent was invalid because Kearns' intermittent windshield wiper system had no new components. It used all off-the-shelf parts. Kearns noted that his invention was a novel and non-obvious combination of parts. Think about that logic. Every invention uses existing materials. Every computer uses silicon and copper and plastic that existed before. Every airplane uses aluminum that was already mined. But the arrangement, the specific, unique, novel arrangement, that's the invention. Ford was essentially arguing that because Kearns didn't invent transistors themselves, he couldn't claim to have invented anything at all. The case consumed 12 years. The liability phase of the Ford case commenced on January 3, 1990. On January 29, 1990, the jury returned a unanimous verdict for Kearns, finding that Ford had not proved by clear and convincing evidence that claims 16 of the 836 patent and other claims were invalid or unenforceable. On March 9, 1990, the district court entered partial judgment that the specified claims were valid, enforceable, and infringed by Ford. Then came the damage phase. The jury, however, was unable to reach a unanimous verdict, and a second trial on damages was held in July 1990. The second jury ultimately returned a unanimous verdict in favor of Kearns, awarding $5,163,842 for the period from April 3, 1978 through 1988. But Kearns wasn't in court when the verdict was read. He was deep in the Maryland woods, cooking knockwurst over a portable stove when a verdict was finally reached. He'd walked out 2 weeks before, accusing the judge of bias. Kearns' mental state was in question, according to court documents and letters, partly because of the inventor's disappearance from the trial 2 weeks before it was settled. Attorneys for both sides agreed that between 1972 and 1988, the automaker sold 20.6 million vehicles with intermittent wipers. The damage award is based on a charge of 30 cents per wiper unit sold. Despite selling 20.6 million cars, worth $575 million in profit, equipped with intermittent wipers, Ford was to pay Kearns a settlement of $10.2 million. Let me put that in perspective. 20 million cars, 30 cents per wiper unit. The jury calculated damages at roughly $5 million. But Ford, wanting to avoid appeals and further litigation, agreed to pay $10.2 million rather than face another round of litigation. The settlement was finalized on November 14, 1990. Jay Jaffe, a Kearns associate, said that the inventor had one time turned down a $30 million settlement offer from Ford. $30 million. He turned it down because it didn't include an admission that Ford had stolen his invention. Kearns did not take the money because he wanted the court to put on record that he was right. Kearns was not pleased. My intent was to have a small shop in Detroit, have nice shrubbery around the plant, hire people. That's been my dream all my life, he said. When they offer you a settlement, they are really sending you to a park bench. He'd won. He was a millionaire, and he'd lost everything that mattered. Though Robert Kearns was a newly minted millionaire, he continued to live an ascetic life, sleeping on the floor of an unfurnished apartment stocked with documents, notes, and witness statements. Think about that. Sleeping on the floor, surrounded by paper. Victory tasted like dust. The following year, he was back in court filing a similar patent infringement suit against Chrysler. Kearns mostly acted as his own attorney in the subsequent suit against Chrysler, even questioning witnesses on the stand. In 1992, Kearns won a judgment against Chrysler for $30 million, though the final amount settled at $18.7 million. Kearns called the sum a booby prize, a prize typically given to a last-place finisher as a joke, and left the money uncollected for years in protest. He filed suit against 18 other automakers, but they were dismissed for various reasons. Some because he missed deadlines. In one instance, his son, Dennis, was found to have wrongly obtained documents by sparking a romantic affair with a paralegal at the firm representing Porsche. The case has consumed his family the way fire consumes oxygen. The money? Eventually, Kearns bought himself an estate in Maryland and entered an uneasy retirement. But even in his waning years, he couldn't let it go. He drove inexpensive used cars. He owned a 1965 Chrysler New Yorker and a 1978 Ford F-150, neither with intermittent wipers. Throughout his embattled life, Robert Kearns made it a point not to drive cars that featured his invention, intermittent windshield wipers. It was one way of protesting the injustice he felt had been done to him by automakers. Hit that like button if you're seeing how this same pattern appears in modern patent battles, how independent inventors still get crushed by corporations with deeper pockets and longer timelines. By the time he died in 2005, the intermittent windshield wiper was an industry standard, built into millions of automobiles around the world. On February 9, 2005, in Sykesville, Maryland, Kearns died of a combination of prostate and brain cancer complicated by Alzheimer's disease. At the time of Kearns' death, he had 2 daughters, 4 sons, and 7 grandchildren. He was 77 years old. Look around today. Independent inventors still face the same choice Robert Kearns faced in that parking lot in 1963. Demonstrate your invention to secure interest, or protect your intellectual property and risk being ignored. Pharmaceutical researchers developing new compounds. Software engineers building revolutionary algorithms. Materials scientists discovering novel alloys. Every one of them faces a corporate demand. Show us how it works. And corporations still play the same game. They bring inventors in as consultants. They ask probing questions. They request detailed demonstrations. Then they thank the inventor, show them to the door, and 6 months later announce they've independently developed something remarkably similar. The patent system was supposed to protect inventors. Kearns filed his first patent for the invention on December 1, 1964. His patent was valid. The courts confirmed it. But what good is a valid patent when defending it requires resources most inventors don't have? At first blush, $10.2 million does sound like a lot of money, but really was a pittance as compared to what Ford made in selling cars that included the copycat intermittent windshield wiper system. Ford had made over 16 million cars during the term of Kearns' patent coverage. At just a $50 per car royalty, which is what Kearns had been seeking when he commenced the lawsuit, Kearns would have earned over $800 million. $800 million versus $10 million. That's not justice. That's the cost of doing business for a corporation. That's what happens when you're fighting a war of attrition against an entity that measures litigation costs against quarterly profits and decides they can afford to wait you out. The case often becomes a modern-day David versus Goliath. But here's what the Bible story gets wrong. David won because he had the right tool and used it correctly. Kearns had the right tool, his patent, but using it required destroying his life, his health, his marriage, his relationship with his children. That's not victory. That's survival at best. Today's inventors learn from Kearns' mistakes and repeat them anyway. Because the alternative, never demonstrating, never showing, never trusting, means never getting your invention to market at all. You're damned if you reveal and damned if you don't. That's a trap corporations have perfected. Some modern inventors try to protect themselves with better NDAs, stronger contracts, more aggressive legal language. Second, check out engaging a litigation funding group or firm. Litigation funding offers a patent owner the capital that they need to vigorously assert an infringement claim without the risk of repayment should the claim not be successful. Third, many patent law firms will represent a patent owner on a contingency basis, depending, of course, on the facts. But none of these solutions address the fundamental asymmetry. A corporation can lose a patent case and continue operating. An inventor who loses everything fighting for what's rightfully theirs may never recover. The financial calculation is brutally simple. Corporations can afford to steal and occasionally pay settlements. Inventors cannot afford to fight and occasionally win judgments. So what was the ONE thing that determined who won? Was it Kearns opening that red box in the Ford parking lot? Was it trusting engineers who smiled and nodded and took notes? Was it believing that a handshake in good faith would protect him? No. The one thing was simpler and more brutal. Robert Kearns believed the system would protect him because he was right. He believed patents meant something. He believed corporations would honor intellectual property. He believed justice mattered more than quarterly earnings. And he was catastrophically, devastatingly wrong. Here's what Kearns learned the hard way, what every inventor needs to understand. Being right doesn't matter if you can't afford to prove it. Having a valid patent doesn't matter if defending it destroys you. Creating something revolutionary doesn't matter if corporations can simply take it and dare you to fight back. But there's a deeper lesson here, one that goes beyond patents and intellectual property. For Robert Kearns, there was a matter of principle and a dream. In recent interviews, Kearns said that his case is not about money. It's about time, he said, accusing Ford and the other car companies of stealing a portion of his life by allegedly taking his invention. He fought for 30 years. Not for money. He turned down $30 million. Not for fame. He lived in an unfurnished apartment sleeping on the floor. He fought because he needed the world to acknowledge what had been taken from him. Kearns did not take the money because he wanted a court to put on record that he was right. Was he right? Yes. The court said so. Multiple juries confirmed it. Ford and Chrysler paid settlements totaling roughly $30 million. But being right cost him his marriage, his relationship with his children, his mental health, and ultimately his life. Because how much of those years spent in courtrooms and sleeping on floors and cooking knockwursts in Maryland woods contributed to the cancer and Alzheimer's that killed him? Which shocks you more, that Kearns won $30 million or that he died believing he'd lost? Tell me in the comments, because understanding that distinction reveals everything about what we value and what we're willing to sacrifice for principle. Remember that red box marked "Do Not Open"? Now you understand it wasn't just a warning to others. It was a warning Kearns should have heeded himself. Some things, once opened, can never be closed again. Some trust, once given, can never be reclaimed. When Ford introduced a feature in 1969, it rolled out to its Mercury line. 6 years after Kearns drove his Galaxy to that parking lot. 6 years after he opened the red box and revealed everything inside. By the time Ford hit the market with the first electronic intermittent wiper in 1969, Kearns was still believing they'd make him a partner. Still trusting. Still hoping for that factory with the nice shrubbery. From a basement laboratory in Detroit where a PhD tinkered with salvaged dashboards to that parking lot at Ford headquarters where 10 engineers smiled and asked questions to a courtroom where a man represented himself against one of the world's largest corporations to an unfurnished apartment where a millionaire slept on the floor surrounded by legal documents. 30 years, 23 notebooks filled with 300 pages each, 26 lawsuits against car manufacturers, roughly $30 million in settlements. Robert Kearns showed us what happens when an inventor believes in the system. What happens when principle matters more than pragmatism? What happens when you're right but the other side can afford to wait you out? Ford showed us what happens when a corporation decides an inventor doesn't count, doesn't matter, doesn't exist. They showed us that stealing is profitable if the settlement costs less than the profits. That justice is for those who can afford to wait 12 years for a verdict. But the truth that remains, the one that echoes through every innovation, every competition, every human striving, is this: the thing you trust most to protect you often becomes a weapon that destroys you. For Kearns, it was his faith in fairness, his belief that being right was enough, his conviction that the system existed to protect inventors like him. That faith cost him everything except the one thing he needed most, acknowledgement that he'd been wronged. If this story changed how you see patent law, intellectual property, and the risks independent inventors face, subscribe to Patent Mysteries. We don't just recite history. We reveal the human mistakes, the pivotal moments, the single decisions that echo across generations. What shocked you most? That Kearns turned down $30 million, that he spent 12 years fighting for it, or that he died believing he'd lost despite winning? Drop your answer below. I read every comment, and you help guide what we investigate next. Remember, being right matters less than being able to prove it. Having a patent matters less than being able to defend it. And winning in court matters less than what you sacrifice to get there. Stay curious, stay protected, and remember, sometimes the only way to win is to walk.